Right, so I'm going to give you an example of how you start. So one of the things I've done is work with the Minister of Creativity and Trade in Indonesia. And there was an idea, right, we've got a hospital and we've got a university and we could have a hotel. And so what might we do if we put all of these in the same spot? So go and map it. So the immediate thing that you start to think about, or I start to think about, is, okay, so why do you want a university there? Do you want to increase learning? Do you want to be cutting edge R&D? Do you want to do medical research because you've got your hospital there? So what sort of things are you going to be doing from the university? Do you want to be onshore? Do you want to be offshore? What sort of value proposition are you going to put? So R&D starts to say, okay, so if we want R&D, do you actually want that to be startups? Do you want it to be, and that starts to come into, there could be creative hubs around. So do you want a creative hub environment? As soon as you want a creative hub environment, that doesn't gel with a hotel. So what you might start to say is, all right, so are we talking about hotels? Is that the right thing? Or are we actually talking about accommodation? Because once you start to talk about startups and R&D, then you need expensive and cheap areas for people to live, and you need all different sorts of things. You need large spaces, which might mean that you could use the hotel. You also need lots of small spaces, and you need short-term and mid-term and long-term housing, because when you start to look at long-term, you've got the hospital and you've also got the universities, and short-term you might also have the hospital. So then we might go over here and say, what would you use the hospital for? Are you going to do cutting-edge research because you are going to leverage the fact that you're near a university? Or are you going to do medical tourism because you've got your hotel? Because that might mean that or are you going to do both? And if you want to do the cutting edge, if you're going to do medical tourism, then are you going to do cheap? Are you going to do medium? Or is it going to be really, really expensive because you're going to do cutting edge medical research, which you then have very high level practitioners, high value add practitioners in your hospitals? So what do you want? What's the value proposition? If it's cutting edge research, then what's the nexus going to be between the hospital and the university? And what that starts to say is, how do you get people together? So how do you use your space? So what you need is areas to be able to ideate, so that becomes cafes and restaurants. It becomes bars, so that might be the hotel. The medical tourism can bring in the hotels, but also the cutting edge research, because some people will come and join for a little while, some people will be there for a long time, so that gets back to the sorts of accommodation. What you're starting to do is build a cluster, build an environment which has got something called geographical munificence. It's a beautiful word, and what that talks about is what happens when you get things in the one spot. So if you've got a university, do you get more cutting edge research in your hospital? One of the interesting things is you get more patents in a hospital with a university close to you if the hospital people don't actually work as part of the university and the university doesn't actually work as part of the hospital. But once they work together, you get much more creativity and innovation in the hospital itself, and you get much more pragmatic research from the university. So that means, what do you build in here? What do you try and make sure will create that nexus between the hospital and the university? So you can start to see that we started off with 3 things, and now we've got lots of questions already. Are we going to be startups? Which means also venture capital. Because if you've got venture capital, is that maybe to do with the hospital as well? So could you be inventing things here between these 2 people that then are going to fuel startups? A really good example of that is a place called Entrep101x, and that's in France. So I spent some time there, and it's an amazing group. That person who heads it, it's in Strasbourg. He works for the university, he has a hospital, as well, which is looking at cutting edge research, and he also has built a hotel for the people to become able to come and work in that environment. So ERCAD does all of it. And the other interesting thing about ERCAD is, because there's a lot of really interesting ideas that happen in ERCAD, it then has its own startup creative hub, where these people are told, here's an idea, if you can make it work, you get the profit. You get the IP. So it's very unusual, it's very different to a normal university. And that came about because of this sort of connection, this sort of geographical benefit. So what you notice is it also drives you to ask the questions. So now there's a lot of questions around what the hospital's role actually is, around what sort of accommodation you need in the environment, and about why the university's there. Is it to teach? Is it R&D? Is it to help drive a cutting-edge hospital? Is it to create startups? Is it all of them?